Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore one of the most astonishing and frankly terrifying battles that can unfold right inside the human body. I want you to picture your central nervous system for a second. It's basically an impenetrable fortress, right? Fortified, heavily guarded, and completely locked down to protect your most vital assets, your brain and your spinal cord. But today, we're looking at a microscopic heist. We're going to break down exactly how a single, highly specialized bacterial invader manages to breach these ultimate defenses.
So, to really grasp the stakes of this heist, we got to start with a very specific medical term, fulminant. It actually comes from the Latin word meaning to throw bolts of lightning. When medical folks talk about a fulminant disorder, they're talking about something rapid, intense, and totally catastrophic. And the infection we're looking at today, Neisserial meningitis, it absolutely deserves this title. A victim can go to bed at night feeling perfectly fine, wake up feeling just a little rough with maybe a scratchy throat, and tragically pass away by that very same evening. It's a literal lightning strike on the human body, one that primarily targets kids and teenagers.
Act 1, the ultimate fortress. Let's take a quick look at our natural anatomical defenses.
Nature goes to some pretty wild lengths to protect our central nervous system. Starting on a macro level, you've got your 7 mm thick, egg-shaped skull in your vertebral column, perfectly designed to shelter your nerves. But inside that bone, things get interesting. The central nervous system is wrapped in 3 specialized membranes called the meninges. The outermost layer, right up against the bone, is the dura mater, which literally means tough mother. It is highly durable. Then, skipping to the innermost layer, wrapping directly around the brain's peaks and valleys like a moist tissue paper, is the pia mater, or gentle mother. And right sandwiched between them is the arachnoid mater. It's this spiderweb-like structure filled with clear cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF. This fluid is constantly circulating, cushioning your brain and spinal cord while delivering nutrients.
But here is where the fortress gets truly microscopic. You see, your blood is constantly circulating past this area, and blood can carry unwanted microbes. And this brilliantly illustrates the genius of our cellular defenses. In normal blood vessels throughout your body, the junctions between endothelial cells are kind of like bolts that have only been finger-tightened. They allow nutrients and white blood cells to just slip through into surrounding tissues. But in the central nervous system, oh no. Those junctions require a firm wrench turn. They are so incredibly tight that they block almost everything except tiny molecules like water and oxygen. This is the famous blood-brain barrier. It's a formidable wall against almost any invader.
Act 2, the silent invader. Because sometimes the call is coming from inside the house.
Okay, brace yourself for this one. It's a surprising reality that right now about 10% of the human population harmlessly harbors this exact bacteria, Neisseria meningitis, in their mouths. It usually just hangs out there, competing with other normal respiratory bacteria for food, completely unnoticed. It doesn't harm us at all. But out of the 20 or so recognized species of Neisseria, this specific one has a serious dark side. When the right genetic circumstances align, it transforms from a harmless houseguest into a hyper-invasive assassin.
These hyper-invasive, virulent strains don't just sit quietly on the surface of our mouths anymore. They use these short, hair-like projections called pili to physically attach themselves to our epithelial cells. And then they do something highly unique. Rather than trying to slip between the cells, they literally burrow straight through them. They penetrate the host cell, travel right through its interior, and emerge on the other side. They just keep doing this, layer by layer, until they breach the bloodstream.
Act 3, defeating the immune system. The microscopic war officially begins.
Once they drop into the bloodstream, the stealth phase is completely over. The pathogen has breached the outer walls, and now it faces the full fury of the human immune system. But this hyper-invasive strain is armed to the teeth for exactly this kind of microscopic war. Okay, let's dive into this impressive and deadly arsenal. First, as we just mentioned, it has those pili for attachment. Second, it surrounds itself with a slimy capsule. When our white blood cells, the neutrophils, try to grab and eat the bacteria, they literally bounce right off it. It's like trying to grab a wet bar of soap. Third, it produces a protein that binds to human factor H. This disables a massive part of our innate immune system called the complement cascade, essentially tying up our defensive proteins so they can't attack. And finally, it deploys specialized enzymes to steal our body's iron reserves, which fuels its own explosive replication.
And you know, the disguise gets even more sophisticated. Most gram-negative bacteria have a long carbohydrate chain on their surface called lipopolysaccharide. But Neisseria meningitis uses a shortened version called lipo-oligosaccharide, or LOS. Because it's shorter, it's way harder for our immune system's B lymphocytes to recognize and target it. But don't let the short length fool you for a second. It contains a highly toxic component called lipid A, which acts as a devastating endotoxin as the bacteria multiply in the blood.
Act 4. A medical emergency. Enter the shock cascade.
This massive proliferation of bacteria, along with that toxic lipid A floating in the bloodstream, triggers a catastrophic cascade. We are now entering a dire medical emergency. The disease accelerates violently as the bacteria begin to occlude, or basically block up tiny blood vessels all throughout the body. All that circulating endotoxin causes our own immune cells, the monocytes, to totally panic. They release copious amounts of inflammatory cytokines, triggering profound septic shock and intravascular coagulation, which means the blood starts clotting inside the vessels themselves. A hallmark physical symptom appears on the patient's skin, these purplish blotches known as petechia. Because the tiny blood vessels are blocked, the blood supply to the extremities is entirely cut off. Tragically, in order to save the patient's life from this shock cascade, amputations of limbs are sometimes required.
So the crucial point is this. What happens if this circulating bacteria manages to reach the meninges and actually alter that super tight blood-brain barrier we talked about earlier? Well, normally, if you test a healthy person's clear spinal fluid, you might find 0 to maybe 1 neutrophil per cubic milliliter. But in full-blown Neisserial meningitis, that number skyrockets to upwards of 50,000. The spinal fluid transforms from crystal clear water into a thick, turbid white fluid just because of the massive, desperate influx of immune cells.
When a doctor performs a lumbar puncture to extract that cloudy spinal fluid, it gets rushed straight to the lab. And what the laboratory technician sees under the microscope is literally the stuff of nightmares. They will note the presence of intracellular gram-negative diplococci. Let's translate that real quick. They are seeing pink, paired, round bacteria that have been swallowed up inside the neutrophils. Seeing this specific shape and arrangement inside the white blood cells is a terrifying dead giveaway for meningococcus.
At this moment, every single minute counts. The disease progresses so rapidly that appropriate antibiotics must be administered instantaneously. But remember that incredible fortress wall, the blood-brain barrier? Yeah, it actually works against us here because it blocks many normal antibiotics from getting in. Doctors have to use highly specific drugs, like third-generation cephalosporins. Ceftriaxone is a great example because they can actually cross the barrier to kill the pathogen. Furthermore, because of how dangerous a heavy infective dose is, close family contacts and healthcare workers have to immediately be given preventative antibiotics, like ciprofloxacin, to stop them from becoming heavily colonized themselves.
Act 5. The vaccine shield. Building our defenses.
Given how fast and devastating this microscopic siege is, waiting around to treat it is a massive gamble. We need a way to build up the fortress walls before the invader ever even arrives. Because outbreaks often happen in crowded places like military bases and college dormitories, vaccines are absolutely vital. Let's move to ennui and see how this builds our defenses. We actually have vaccines for the 5 major clinical strains. For types A, C, W, and Y, scientists took the bacteria's slippery polysaccharide capsule and attached it to a harmless mutant diphtheria protein called CRM197. This genius combination forces our immune system to build long-lasting IgG antibodies and memory T cells. But type B, it is incredibly sneaky. Its capsule chemically mimics human sialic acid, meaning our body thinks it's looking at our own human cells and just won't attack it. So for the type B vaccine, scientists had to use a clever workaround, targeting specific surface proteins instead, like that factor H binding protein we mentioned earlier, to train our immune system.
Thanks to these vaccines, cases have plummeted in developed nations, saving countless young lives. It's a real triumph of modern science. But this organism is far from extinct. As immunity wanes, outbreaks still occur, particularly in the meningitis belt of sub-Saharan Africa. The battle is very much ongoing, and it leaves us with a profound question. With these hyper-invasive strains continually circulating and mutating globally, how will our medical shields continue to evolve to outsmart the next fulminant threat? It requires extreme, constant diligence. The balance between human health and microscopic invaders is incredibly fragile, and as we've seen today, the consequences of a breach are simply too dire to ignore. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep staying curious.